what was the most difficult issue that you had to overcome in order to integrate with the town where your farm is located? Did you find the effort you made was what made the acceptance in the town more fruitful? I mean,
well, yeah, this is a very small place. So there was some mixed feelings when we moved to town. You know, some people were very happy to see new blood and enthusiasm for agriculture and so forth. So some people were really super enthusiastic, but there's also, some mixed emotions that I think it's difficult really to put your finger on, whether there's some resentment or some sort of just fear of outsiders. But I don't think it's, I think it probably, keeps going on and on in these small towns. I think it's something that probably happens even in these places that we sort of idealize. Maybe there is something to human nature trying to, that might be our next step, to move beyond sort of intergenerational community feuds and figure out how to transcend that. Because I think if everything was, perfect, so to speak, in that Italian village where everyone knew their neighbor and everyone knew where their food came from in the 1800s, why'd so many people up and leave? Why'd they move to the cities? Why'd they become pioneers and go to like the far reaches of the globe to sort of get away from that? So there's some deep motivations there for individual freedom, so to speak, that we need to figure out how to transcend and move onwards with DAcres. Because we've been through that phase where the town tried to have a lawsuit against us, and now my dad's the freaking chairman of the planning board, and I'm the moderator. So we have a lot of political and a lot of name recognition and all that that gives people that integrity in a small town. But by the same token, it's figuring out how we're going to form more effective neighborhood alliances, how we're going to welcome new neighbors, and how we're going to bring neighbors that perhaps are have old feuds going. How do you bring them back into the fold? Because we don't want to disenfranchise the people that we got.
Right.
So that's a big component of moving forward into the next 100 years. I think the key word, if there is one, would be inclusion. Just try to be very inclusive. Try to be honest and transparent in your operations is really helpful.
Unconditional.
Okay. You mentioned that Dorchester, New Hampshire is a farming community with an existing range. What have you been able to pass on to the existing farmers in terms of knowledge, and what have they passed on to you?
Well, geez, a lot of the farmers that are in like the Grange, so to speak, are elderly, seniors. So, the farming that they're doing at this phase is more, armchair type farming. But that's been super helpful. All sorts of, wisdom about what to grow, when to grow it, just contacts, how to build things, how to keep animals. Been super helpful to plug into that wisdom. But the agriculture is really, almost a couple of generations back. The stone walls up there or whatnot have grown moss and have dug themselves into the ground. They used to be 4, 5, 6 feet tall. Now they're like barely 2 foot tall.
Right.
So it's been the history, a lot of it has gone. lots of ways it's sort of sad. I think a lot of with the biodigestion at this farm, and you know we've experimented a little bit with it, is keeping that ambient temperature up.
Yeah.
Making sure that you can keep the temperature up and the process happening, just because the ambient temperature around here drops so severely.
Right. I read that they do. I mean, burying it maybe, you know, doing that way. But it's almost like how do you put it on a slope so you could be up at the top and pour it into the top and have it buried so it maintains its heat, and then have a drain that comes out so you get the liquid fertilizer, you know, out of the bottom after you do that. And it's funny, I haven't actually come across a really good design that, you know, hands-on, besides, you know, a 55-gallon drum, and, you know, which works, but, you know.
There's a fellow that we know over in Vermont, because Vermont's really leading the way with this by instituting some regulations for municipalities to be putting this organic waste into some sort of alternative stream, because right now, you know, it's getting landfilled. Right. So all this organic material that's coming out of restaurants and so forth, they want to remove that from the waste stream and put that into some sort of, you know, biodigesters. So they're using technology from the paper industry, the pulp industry. Yeah. Instead of bigger auger type systems, so that they can keep that the material, the stew, cooking. Yeah. So that's the future of it. I think it'll be interesting to see, like you're saying, is it community scale or is it municipal scale? Like, how do you get enough of the stuff, the right ingredients, right, to really make it effective?
Yeah, and you know, there's always that problem of holding up and going, should we just do it like, you know, do we have enough here? But if we do it here and then we decide to do it on a municipal scale or community scale, then we have to redo it, and then, you know, so should we wait, kind of thing. That's why 20 years goes by and we haven't done anything.
Yeah, nothing happens.
It seems like a waste to try something and then have to, you know, reconfigure it. But I mean, until someone gives me those really good designs for a biodigester, you know, instead of me waiting around for the design, you know, it's the kind of thing where, okay, well, I have to go buy a concrete tank and put it in the ground and see what's going to work, kind of thing. You know, it's going to suck when I have to empty the whole thing because I decide that I have to put a different type of screw in or something. But, you know, that's the best way to learn anyway. I mean, that's, I guess.
It's going to take some experimentation, for sure, to get where we need to get. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And I think if we answered the question in the first, 2 minutes or so.
Okay.
That's what is the knowledge give and take between the old farmers here and you guys? You know?
Yeah.
So.
Well, we asked lots of questions.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Well, that's almost one of it. I mean, sometimes you think you know the answer, but you're going to ask a question just to be kind of like neighborly, or, you know, to involve somebody, and then next thing you know, going, wow, that wasn't even there.
I think too, just the pace of the workday and the efficiency of the workday, you know, is definitely that we've learned at this farm about how to get things done. You know, just sort of have a regular time to break, you know, for meals and so forth. Yeah. And other than that, just try to be organized and effective in the time we have together to get things done. And I don't think you necessarily get that as well from your peers as you do from people who have lots of work experience.
Which came first, integrated design or implementation of knowledge? In other words, did you sit back and, I saw the property plans upstairs, you sit back and just draw everything out, or did you go, okay, well, I know how to do this, so let's start and get something going?
Well, a little of both, you know. We did try to put as much as we could on paper, you know, as much as time would allow, but we weren't really entranced or entrained with that, you know, so it was pretty fluid, pretty flexible evolution. It continues to be. I think, you know, we struggle with that as well, because I think people would like to have a better idea of what's next and what's gonna proceed. But I think so much of it does rely on the people power. Who's here, when, what their interests, what their enthusiasm, what their passion, what their skill base is. You know, putting that complex dynamic of people together, which continues to evolve. That's the symphony. That's the orchestra. That's how things have gotten done around here. So we sort of depend on that, and rely on that, and are fed by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand it's going to be pretty tough that you seem to have sort of like a transient, changeable.
It's the nature of the communities movement, unfortunately, and with our culture, we just have sort of this time deficit disorder. We just don't have the ability to sink roots and to have really satisfaction, I think, from that. I think there's always something greener pasture, and so we're perpetually sort of torn by that anxiety of, you know, something could be better somewhere, you know, this situation could be better, and there's just a lack of satisfaction. Until we find that within ourselves, within our culture, it's going to be difficult to have a sense of permanence, a sense of continuity.
I think we were talking about that a little bit earlier, where it just seems that people can't wait. It's always going to be something more, something else, you know. And don't even stick around long enough to really gain a good idea of what's going on. I mean, they could be here and say, well, stuff could be better, or stuff could be moved faster, or stuff could whatever. But we'll go start your own. And 5 years from now, you'll see that you haven't even gotten anywhere close to it because you didn't see the main problem. The problem is that nobody, like you, doesn't stick around and really immerse yourself into the situation. So.
Yeah, there's so much of this type of work happening at this place and that place and this place and that place and this other place. It's just very rare when we could bring, you know, even 2 or 3 of those places together.
Right.
You know, you just don't see that. It's sort of discouraging, but I think it is the greatest challenge, and it's the one that needs to be addressed, is how, instead of everyone sort of creating their own place like this, or their own sort of island, how do we join together?
Comes into the next question, which is your idea of land tenure. You envision at some time stepping aside, letting others pick up and steer the project. Is there an inclusion of town members or town council as part of that board of directors to aid in such a transition?
Well, yeah, as far as the formula, you know, how to move forward, we don't really have that quite figured out. I think I would like to get to a situation where, you know, my parents, my great aunt and uncle bought the property, and they gave it to my parents prior to them being deceased, because they didn't have any living heirs. So my parents have owned it now for, I don't know, 30 odd years, and their plan is to give it to me, and I'll be the inheritor. And I just don't envy that task of, you know, having to give something of this nature onto the next generation, particularly if they weren't interested in being farmers or managing the land. And so we're trying to figure out a community ownership model.
Right.
And so right now, you know, you have this nonprofit entity, the DAcres entity, that leases the property. But it's a fairly, you know, juvenile nonprofit. And so we're not sure it's capable of, you know, having enduring lifespan.
Right.
So if we put the property into that shell, into that structure, then if the entity was unable to survive, they would have to pass it on. And if it went to another like-minded entity, then it might get sold once again. And so what we're looking to do is prevent, you know, the subdivision of these farm tracts, and figure out ways where collectively we could continue the ownership. So there's been discussion of forming like a separate land trust that would manage the land while the nonprofit continued the education and community outreach work that we do. There's also been discussion of sort of forming another style of entity, a collective ownership entity that multiple partners could own the land, sort of a LLC that had more of a service mission.
Right.
And so it would have to stick to that service mission, but could still be the ownership could still be transferred, and people could make money legitimately through that entity. But we still really haven't. I mean, a lot of it is the limitations of the legal structure. So I think what we need to be looking for is broadening the laws, what's legally allowed.
Right.
So that certain entities such as this can form and allow collective ownership, collective decision making, because we don't really have those good structures in place to make that possible.
Yeah, you have. You mentioned in the interview too that there were some ideas that seemed pretty radical, or even to the United States, when we're supposed to be able to freedom, that socialism and communism and communal living, communal sharing, and that kind of stuff, which isn't something that, in a capitalist American system, everybody has a clear and cut ownership to absolutely everything. So, because we took everything from the Indians because they didn't have a clear cut idea of ownership or something, maybe, but.
Yeah, things have happened really rapidly. You're right. I mean, I think it's a lot better system in many regards than what people left in Europe. If they came from, if the colonialists came across from the European system at the time, it wasn't very democratic, and it wasn't very, it was very hierarchical.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, there's been tremendous amounts of improvements in our system of government, and our system of land ownership, but it's still very new.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's much room for improvement, and so we need to be able to integrate different ideas and different systems for different circumstances. And as the circumstance continues to evolve, so must the laws.
Right.
So, there's zoning, which is sort of a separate thing. But I think ultimately the town's interested in the tax base.
Right.
And what services they have to supply to offset the costs.
Mm-hmm.
What revenue they can raise to offset the cost of the services. So you look at are we going to influence the school? Are we going to influence the other services, the fire, the police, any of those services? And basically that's the budget. So I mean, in a very, very libertarian sense, as long as we cover our costs, so as long as we still maintain that tax base,
right.
I think there's a lot of freedoms in terms of the ownership.
What is your greatest agricultural accomplishment you've achieved today?
I think it's all about food, really. We did, when we first came here, we were ordering chips and salsa, really like eating really out of, it's sort of like a natural food store,
Right.
which is great, people were eating well, but the direction we wanted to go was provide more of our own food self-subsistence, and I think it's really grown, and we've also learned quite a bit in that process. So I think that would be the greatest achievement. Not only being able to produce such and such quantity, but it's also the quality, how it was preserved. Our preservation techniques continue to improve. It's not like we're just freezing everything. So being able to preserve the food with different traditional techniques is really that's inspiring. It also you can really savor it with the flavor. The whole experience is very rewarding. Not only consuming it yourself, but sharing it with other people.
Right.
I like to hit it with an axe. Or throw it on the tile floor.
And smash.
Yeah, that's a good way to just smash it on the floor. That's a good way to take care of a big old splash.
Do the Gallagher thing with the sledgehammer out there.
No, you don't need to.
You
You
just
just
throw it?
smash. With that hatchet, crack it right open, cut it clean. It's a good way to go.
I know this is a solarium here that you guys.
Solarium. Yeah, it's just that you just got to add a little emphasis on the beginning part.
Okay.
Solarium. Yeah.
So the question was, what is the greatest technological adaptation that you have affected that both models natural design and benefits the site the most?
The internet.
Yeah?
Yeah, the internet is what has done a tremendous amount of outreach potential for the organization and brought a lot of people to this place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I came here in '97, and it was really just like dial up and very not a super efficient thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I didn't invent the internet, and I didn't do a lot of the website design or anything like that, but I have been involved with the social media and the YouTube and the different outlets, just sort of tracking its course, and it's had a tremendous influence on our capacity as an organization. As a single piece of technology, I really love the solar dehydrator.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the cob oven is an excellent tool, but as far as what the bling that brings people in from New York City and Boston and Montreal, they wouldn't have made it to us unless we had this technology. It's really empowered the organization, our financial capacity, to make it so I can get out there and do the type of perennial gardening that is needed to be done. To plant walnuts and to plant trees that might not bear crops for another 5, 10, 15 years. You need economic stimulus.
Right.
And so we've leveraged that technology, that internet, to provide us the boost that gets us the population here that spends money, that allows me to go buy those walnut trees and put them in the ground and tend to them, so that 50 years from now the system will have more backbone to it.
Right.
But it's an economic stimulus that the technology provided us that wasn't available to my aunt and uncle. I can think of the big thing that we have that they didn't have when they were up here is electric fence.
Mm-hmm.
Electric fence is made, and they did have it to a degree, but they were older.
Right.
But when they were in their farming prime, all they had was barbed wire. And you can't fence in these huge sections of this land for pigs like we're doing without electric. It wouldn't have worked with barbed wire. They would have got out, and it wouldn't have been effective for this time, the techniques we're using here.
The pigs don't notice what's in their way; they just keep going.
Yeah, the barbed wire just is cheap. The electric fence is just cheap, super effective. You can just enclose large areas, and so that technology is huge compared to what my aunt and uncle had 50 years ago. But the internet, my aunt and uncle would have never been able to attract people from Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
They would have never, they would have the paid advertising, print advertising. They would have never been able to develop a business of this magnitude, of this, that provides the level of income that we enjoy. We can talk about money a long time.
And get nowhere. And,
Well, I think there's definitely, money I think is a useful tool. I think there just needs to be lots of changes in its fluidity and how it's exchanged and who holds the production, who makes the money.
What's the greatest community integration achievement that you have accomplished? I mean, you said you're the moderator and your dad's on the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah. Oh,
You
yeah.
know, I mean, that's community, that's definitely, because those are elected positions, right?
Sure.
So that's almost like a,
But you gotta understand, it's a small town, 300 people.
Yeah.
And lots of people don't want to do these jobs, so it's not like you have a lot of competition on.
well, that's community integration, so that's a big deal. Anything?
I think so. I think that in terms of accomplishment, I think we're trying to do stuff all the time. It's a never-ending part of what we do. Looking at, just the broad constituency that's out there in terms of the community and how we can positively affect the situation here. So it's, we do what we can on the big scale and the sort of minutia. Just being that consistent force in this place, I think is probably the greatest accomplishment. Because there's a long list of things I could sort of go by, but being consistent, I think is something, people being able to depend on us is an achievement.
Yep. Do you implement on a conscious basis the permaculture ethics of support earth, support people, and invest and distribute the surplus?
I don't know how conscientious it is at this point. I think it's just sort of the modus operandi that we've adopted, and I think it comes through in most of our protocols and procedures, and just sort of it is the basis of what we're trying to do. And I think to a large degree, I think the permaculture ethics are basic human ethics. I don't think they're corporate ethics. I think that's where the separation is. I don't think those ethics are something that, in general, people when they wake up in the morning aren't thinking, well, I want to do the opposite of that.
Screw your neighbor.
Yeah.
Steal what you want.
Yeah, I don't think they're thinking that. I think that it's good human nature is what we're looking at. And I think it's getting subverted. Well, I don't think it's a subverted technique. It's an overt technique of the corporate mentality to victimize, to exploit, to make to let greed dictate your day-to-day life. And so we just need to separate ourselves from that dominant culture. And it's really important to sort of remember the philosophy behind that. But I think it is sort of a basic, in lots of sense, part of our human nature, those ethics.
You said that both of those ethics are actually part of human nature, the greed one and the...
Well, yeah, I'm sure they both are, but in terms of where, your basic human intuition is going to lead us, I think there is something in us that's compelling us to work away from that greed sentiment. Because it's not going to lead to the betterment of our people, of our humanity. I think that ultimately, the sentiment of greed, the sentiment of resource depletion, of overconsumption, leads to ruin. And it's happened time and time again through human history. But I think we are students of history, and I think we can learn and move beyond that. Yeah.
I agree.
Thanks, Bree.
Well, you stay out of this argument.
Is it an argument?
This discussion.
I just don't even envision it as an argument. I think it's commonsensical. I think we need to move beyond what we've been sort of been brainwashed. You've been very much by this.
In the interview, you speak about understanding that there could be some overtones of communism or pioneering and the need for legal, political, and economic changes. But DAcres is in northern New Hampshire, far from the epicenter of anything. Do you perceive of your pioneering as a challenge or a force in changing these systems within the state of the country? Or are you content to be one of the thousands of points of light that will initiate a grassroots change across the world by slow, quiet steps?
Geez, I think that's really, what unfolds as far as the future. I think it's got to, I don't see it keeping going the way it has been going for much longer. I've been amazed that it just keeps chugging away.
You mean the economy, the political system as it is now? You would figure that somehow it would crash and burn on its own overweight?
You just would figure. I mean, it's such a delicate, just a house of cards.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, what's prevented it from going down is how highly crafted the illusion that we're living in has become. I think that people are just very, very set in this belief that this is the way it is, and this is the way it should be, and this is the way it'll continue. And so it's going to take something cataclysmic to change that. And so I'm not sure, what I see us doing in pioneering, I'm not sure has the potential to be this 1,000 points of light or some such, or has the potential to be like an epicenter.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, I'm not saying we're the only ones doing this by any means, but I think it provides a model for when the shit finally hits the fan. And I don't know if that's the type of thing where, it is something cataclysmic, but I think with the resource depletion issues and population concerns and economic and social world economic, social and political situation, that it could deteriorate awful rapidly. Just all of a sudden. And so the places such as this provide a step in the right direction. A next step as we go off into that abyss of really not knowing what to do. Because despite all the problems of the current system, it's very clear what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to fight for your survival, jump into the system and just start rolling,
Mm-hmm.
just start dog paddling, keep your head above water. But when it comes to this system, the next system, where we're going to have to depend on one another and work together, we don't have a roadmap. We don't have a basis for what to do. We don't have a basis really for that belief system. So we need to find a way to build that. And I think we are providing, a positive example in that regard. But we're a long way from being the solution or a solution. So I think what we serve is just, as we step off into this abyss of not knowing, of an evolutionary step, and it provides us, just a toehold on something else. And we're going to have to use all our human ingenuity and creativity to leap on and move on to a different plane. It is. It's a scary moment, but it's empowering as well.
Yeah.
It's inspiring.
Well, it is. It goes to the stability that you have. At least you don't know what lies ahead of you, but you have confidence in your abilities. That chances are that if you stay focused, that you can weather the storm.
I feel pretty good about that. We'll make it home.
Okay, well, this is the last of the initial 10 questions. Where would you like to see DAcres by the time that you were ready to step back and be an observer or volunteer rather than director?
Well, that's any time.
Just still in existence, you know?
Anytime, yeah. Yeah, no, I don't really have any prerequisites for like what it should look like now or in the 20 years from now. I mean, it's been a success since when we started. I mean, because we showed up and we tried from day one. It's been a success, and it's built upon that success every day since then. I mean, it's a tremendous legacy, and I'm very proud of it. But by the same token, if it had to end tomorrow, it's been a success. And so, feel really good about that in general. I think that's one of the reasons it sort of keeps going, is you have that sort of confidence or that swagger in what you've already done. Feel pretty good about going on into the future. But as far as, you know, if you had to pinpoint it, it'd be nice if people were here and working together and trying to reach out into the broader community. I think that's an important component of what we've done here. So those basic parameters, you know, if every farm lived it by that model, that would be the big vision.
Right.
If every farm allowed, you know, the non-deeded owners to participate in the decision making and the equity, and they had a mission of community outreach, the world would be a wonderful place. Yeah. As far as a business model and a structure of land stewardship, I think it's a wonderful vision, and I think it's a totally attainable vision.
Have you been in touch with, I mean, Plymouth State has to have an agricultural department or a horticulture department.
Yeah, you know, it's more like at this point it's been crafted into like a sustainability type. It's a very liberal arts. It's not a very hard science. It's not like a big land trust where they have a Department of Agriculture. It's smaller, and that they weave their curriculum or what their offerings to what the student interests are.
Right.
And that student interest is now this sort of just sustainability. You know, they talk a lot about resource depletion and economics and environmental ethics and that sort of thing. But it's not, they don't have a very hard science regarding agriculture. It's like meteorological.
Right, but that's a specialty that can come in handy for farming. Certainly.
Oh yeah, we have worked with them quite a bit. In terms of our overall outlook at this juncture, we've experimented with quite a bit of this. You know, doing outreach with the meteorological department of Penn State and doing some hard science and research with them, you know, grant funded stuff and partnerships, and also, you know, done youth ed, you know, get school groups out here, get a lot of at-risk youth out here. In moving forward, we're going to take low-hanging fruit pretty much whenever it's offered. You know, if somebody from the university wants to come out for a tour, especially if they're willing to contribute,
right?
That's a done deal. Let's make that happen. If it's more of a longer term partnership, getting into doing some research, getting into hosting interns, or establishing something that's going to be more substantive with the youth. You know, getting into the elementary schools versus just hosting them for an occasional tour.
Right.
That needs to be led by personnel who are passionate and who will be satisfied by sort of that pursuit. Like in terms of organizational longevity and perpetuity, like it's a difficult thing to force.
Right.
I think where we are right now is definitely, be open, be inclusive, be inviting to all these possibilities, but also be wary of, you know, the time commitment and the fact that you just can't do all this stuff. So you pick your low-hanging fruit, you pick your the things that are really you're passionate about, and you have personnel that are passionate and enthusiastic about, and that's where, you know, you make your impact and you feel good about it, because you can definitely get strung out in so many different ways,
Right.
and so you're trying to make those decisions almost on a case by case.
Right. Well, I know we discussed the personnel basis and the same kind of thing. It was like, you know, when you're ready, by the time that you were ready to step back and kind of take a, you know, a seat on the porch kind of thing, you know, you like to see.
Hopefully that'll be another 100 years.
Right. But what do you like to see? Like, I want to see a consistent group of 10 people, 8 to 10 people that are here.
Yeah.
That participate in that. It's even if it's a part-time, they're here only during the summer, but every year you know they're going to come back and you're like
Be the
teachers,
youth coordinator.
you know, that kind of stuff.
Do the summer camp.
Right.
Yep.
You know, so there's, you know, it's like a tier. You're growing, you know, you can take on a little more. I mean, I looked at the web page and some of the documentation, like the guide you have for local produce and kind of stuff. I mean, I know that all that stuff is, you know, it all takes time. It's talked about permaculturists as being jacks of all trades and masters of none. But you mentioned that there was a German permaculturalist who said that the better view was a jack of all trade, master of one. So permaculturists were the kind of people that had a specialty that they were very passionate and they were concentrated and knowledgeable about, but they were able to interact with all the other specialists, and they were able to do all the other jobs that kind of fell in between the cracks, or that other specialists needed hands on that kind of stuff. You know, to be just kind of like a handyman wasn't really it. That was someone that was just basically, you know, doing whatever actually came to mind in the morning. But if you were a specialist at one thing, that you could bring a special concept to the permacultural site, that was a more important thing.
It's interesting with Holgram. So that's a quote attributed to Holgram.
Yeah.
The master of one.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting with Holgram how he has these little like haikus or whatnot, and it's like how you decipher and interpret them. I'm sure he probably deciphered it and interpreted it in the interview more precisely. But when I hear that, sometimes I wonder, I would wonder if the master of one is the art of permaculture, and just being a jack of all trades is that art in itself. But you're saying it's more a master of one being like, well, as long as you do have that electrical or that welding or that carpentry or that culinary.
Or the botanical, the animal husbandry, or the, you know, because there's so much knowledge. 150 years, I mean, Benjamin Franklin did so many things. He was a specialist in all sorts of things. And Isaac Newton wasn't just they didn't even have physics and gravity, you know, he discovered it basically. Mm-hmm. So 100, 200 years ago, it was easy to basically know how to do everything you're doing here by one guy. He knows all that stuff.
Well,
and now there's so much knowledge that.
Well, see, I think those people are anomalies, though. Like, I think there's a reason that we know Ben Franklin's name 200 years ago. Mm-hmm. Later, I think it's an anomaly that we know Einstein 50 years later. I think it's an anomaly that we know Newton. Mm-hmm. I think some of these people were just off the charts in terms of their capacity to retain information, their capacity to generate creativity. Da Vinci, these people. There's a reason we still remember their names.
Yeah.
400, 500 years later is because they were just off the charts. Mozart, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Maybe I would just feel better about it if it is going to be like this master one. If we change it from master to passion for one, you know. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll call Mr. Holgram and suggest that, because I think that would appeal to me more. Mm-hmm. If it is going to be that sort of a real specialization that it be dictated by a passion.
Well,
I'm going to shut this off.
Yeah.